I will start a little bit of what in the 2 years ago, where our head or where my head was a little bit at. We had one of the biggest challenges in IT, in my view. Not this is not a challenge that is exclusive to Fortum. This is a challenge that I've seen all over in so many different companies. Pretty much all the companies that I have worked or interacted with suffer a little bit from this dilemma, which is the IT versus IT dilemma. In one hand, you usually have modern software development, and in the other one, you have the traditional type of IT infrastructure, innovation versus central IT, CTO versus CIO, digital development versus core IT. In one hand, you have the move fast and break things, and the other, you want the reliable, predictable, secure IT environments. I mean, I'm pretty sure this is probably very familiar to all of you because all the companies have a little bit of this duality across different parts of IT on how IT is done. And this was no exception for us, of course. But in my view, of course, when we wanted to reshape and reorganize IT and drive for those strategic priorities, it was really important that we have a holistic picture on how to do IT and these different levels on how can we actually optimize this, maybe in a non-traditional way. So how do we take a little bit this dilemma forward? And we started a little bit on thinking not just about how to structure IT, we started to think a little bit on how do we actually navigate IT processes? How do we look at the map and how do we set the operating model? So we spend a bit of time on, in addition to where we rethinking the organization, also rethinking what are the responsibility areas, the different process, how are teams engaging with one another, what are the different delivery types. And I think one of the things that we realize, and I think this is very common in a lot of companies, that if you have different processes without really thinking about the end user experience or who is going to use those services, you really lose sight of what actually matters, which is delivering business value in a company. So mapping these different user journeys and understanding a little bit what are actually the problematic, time-consuming areas is something that we started in the past years and something that has been guiding a lot of our thinking going forward. Now, of course, when you think about platform, there is one particular definition that I'm thinking it's probably fairly familiar to most of you at least, which is that a platform is the digital platform. A digital platform is a foundation of self-service APIs, tools, services, knowledge, and support. But the part that I really love about this sentence is actually the last part, a compelling internal product. Because that's what we were also seeing, and I see in many companies that if you don't have something compelling, of course, nobody wants to use it, or then people are forced to use it, which is worse. So one of the things that we started to look at it and how do we make things compelling, and actually what are we beating against? Because in a way, especially in big companies, you can always go like, well, this is the way and nothing else, but that actually shatters the innovation and shatters these delivery models, right? So one of the things is that you want to drive from manual to automated, from tickets to self-service, and things that usually take days to minutes. That's fairly kind of straightforward. I think that the metric that I usually have is the credit card metric, meaning that can you make it more easier to use than someone swiping a credit card and actually purchasing the service by themselves? We see that a lot of times in the beginning, 3 to 4 years ago, it was taking days to provision a cloud environment, a cloud account, a sandbox environment. There was multiple teams involved, multiple tickets involved, and I mean, you know very well that if you go to Microsoft Azure or AWS by yourself in your home, you can just open an account in a few minutes with a credit card as a payment method, right? I mean, that's the number to beat. That's the experience that you want is as seamless as possible. And I think this type of thinking has been guiding a lot how we think about platform engineering, is thinking making things easier for the target persona that is using those services, right? And otherwise you end up having a lot of shadow IT by definition. So you don't necessarily want that. But how do we actually merge these two different worlds when you think about who is the target personas. And that forces us to think a little bit how we think about platform engineering. And I think we had these two camps, the IT versus IT, right? In one way, we have this core IT area and the other day digital development. In core IT area, you usually have different service managers that have different applications or services that are usually off the shelf software that they are either using a SaaS as a SaaS, or they want to self-host it in public cloud or self-hosted in data centers, depending on the use case, of course. But it typically ends. It's a very simple from an infrastructure point of view, fairly straightforward. You know, a VM, a container, and database, and that's pretty much it in most of those cases, right? And then in the other one, you have the most complex use cases, technology complex use cases, which you might have a data platform or a software development team doing a product, or having an innovation and venturing team doing an experiment. So you have a little bit more technology complex cases that require a little bit of a different audience. Usually you have a software engineer as an audience in that case. So when we start thinking about platform engineering, this actually happens. We realize this actually, you have platform engineering in both of these worlds. In one hand, you usually have a managed service provider in the companies that are providing this type of infrastructure as a service to different application service managers and application teams. And in the other hand, you end up usually having a platform or DevSecOps or developer experience team looking at digital development, looking at software engineers. This, of course, in an extreme case, can even be as you can even have subsets of this type of teams. You can have multiple platform engineering teams for different product business lines. So it ends up being a little bit more complex. So one of the things that we did is that, of course, we are encouraging, and we have each of the application or development teams having end-to-end ownership with their own DevOps engineers, with their own uh, running their own operations, but we wanted to streamline the parts that are common. And what we did was that when we rethought the organization, we thought this needs to be combined. These two worlds are one, should be one and the same, meaning that we need to apply, you need to, in one hand, allow the digital development teams to have that end-to-end ownership, but still have a common standard way to provide things like GitHub repositories, as an example, or CI/CD pipelines to some extent on how to use GitHub Actions, but allowing that type of in a way self-service capability coming from the engineering team. And in another way, you wanted for the core IT, you wanted to apply modern DevOps, modern platform engineering principles on how to actually manage the traditional type of infrastructure, and you wanted to combine the best of the both worlds. So one of the first things was that, well, platform engineering is vast, actually. There's many different things to consider when you think an enterprise, because it's not one size fits all. So how do you differentiate between this? So one of actually the things that we did was thinking like, what are the platform engineering capabilities that we want to have as a common? And I selected here five, and this is a little bit how we have been thinking about the topic and how we've been applying this topic. In one way, you have, of course, platform engineering, the most, let's say, common parts of it, which is looking at how you do how you are managing data centers, cloud, and developer experience. So things like how do you are managing AWS environments, Azure, how you are doing the DevOps tooling. And here, of course, target audience is, of course, the developers by definition, but also the service managers. So how you do that infrastructure as a code, as a common baseline, how you do landing zones as an example, right? And then another one that was very important to us is the Microsoft M365 ecosystem together with identity and access management. So this is a bit area on its own when looking at authentication and access, Exchange, Entra ID, PKI, privileged access management, identity governance administration. So those are topics that are very kind of key also when you have a robust platform engineering capability. So here the target customers, of course, also the same developers and service managers. Then network and connectivity, things like SSE, zero trust, remote access, how you do IT, and in our case, because we have operational technologies, OT connectivity. And here again, the same type of target audience. And then we have two separate, well, maybe not so separate, but two additional platform engineering capabilities that, in a way, are built a little bit on top of this ones. One, cybersecurity platforms, where you are looking at IT, security operations, data center, data platform, and OT, SOC data platform, security operations tooling. And here, the target audience is, of course, very niche because they are working very close with the SOC analysts, with IT and OT cybersecurity specialists. So essentially doing the engineering, cybersecurity engineering capabilities. And then data platforms also build on top of the previous ones, looking at things like customer data platforms, asset data platforms, integration area. And here you can actually have, in both in our company and most companies, we end up actually having maybe not just one of this, but actually multiple of different data platforms, depending on the purpose, and different teams working on those. So when we look at that purple box, that was actually the first thing, like how do we define this platform engineering capabilities and how we want to organize ourselves about it. Then the other was that, well, how does this fit in the whole stack? How does this fit in the, how, when we start looking at delivering value, how should the holistic delivery model actually work? Because of course you have all of these baseline capabilities, but then is a bit, how does this interact with um, IT service and application management, both and also with IT service desk, IT service support. Essentially, how do you guide this all the way? How do you look in the stack all the way, guiding from platform to different applications to different end user capabilities on how to, what are the support channels? So looking at that holistically, how to build that end-to-end flow on how to deliver value was something that guided our thinking. This is part, this slide in particular, by the way, this is actually a normal, this is a very standard service management diagram. It's color coded a little bit to us, but we try to go off the shelf when it comes of this operating model as much as possible when looking at, what good looks like in other companies as well. I think this is maybe important to understand, that looking as much as possible, how do you are able to compare, also how to benchmark your capabilities across industries, as an example. But then there was a third part that comes a little bit more from the cyber, because I think one of the key things is that when you look at this, the cyber security is a little bit, well, it is a little bit kind of a mysterious box in here, because where is it, right? That's, which is one of the key topics. But of course, it's across all of these angles. One of the things that we've been reflecting quite a lot is how the platform engineering changed how we are thinking about cybersecurity, but also vice versa, how cybersecurity has been evolving, and that is changing how we have been thinking about platform engineering. And here, when we think about cybersecurity, there's, of course, there's, at the bottom, you have all of this built-in platform capabilities, um, but then, and they are delivering value for core IT applications and services, and also digital development. But then cyber, there's essentially two areas, very distinct in cybersecurity, that need to interface with this. One is more on the governance side of cyber. So cybersecurity strategy, governance, compliance, how we manage cyber risk, how we build cybersecurity culture awareness. Those are needs to go through all the stack, and they are very common on how to, basically, that's maybe what people are more familiar with it, how you do, for instance, in the application security, but also in the platform engineering cloud, how do you do the security of your landing zones, as an example, and or your security policies in the cloud. Those tend to be very common. And of course, this needs to come all across this angle. Then on the right side, you have the more operational type of cybersecurity that needs to be, and which in most companies is a security operations center, right? But the key part for this is that how does that security operations center is interfacing both with 24/7 platform operations center, or application management, or IT service desk. And we see this kind of triangle of different 24/7 type of capabilities that are in a company, more operational teams that need to interact with across themselves. the interesting thing is that how does this also interact with this platform capabilities? And here, of course, each of these five different platform engineering capabilities are interacting by themselves with different cyber security teams in completely different ways, depending on the target audience of those. So one thing that really guided our thinking when looking at this was that we had to really understand how the different teams are interacting with each other. I think that was one of the maybe the key foundational elements looking at this, but also how different platform engineering teams are really thinking about cybersecurity, because essentially their roadmaps and their backlogs look completely different according with what is actually required. Meaning that when you think about, for instance, on the network side, of course, naturally they are looking at network security and zero trust, and that's a cybersecurity capability by itself. The most specially of this squads in the cybersecurity realm is the cybersecurity platforms, by definition of its own title, right? But what I wanted to lift on this is that it really it was really important for us to have that cybersecurity platforms squad as its own element. And the reason was that those what we realized that in operational teams like SOC, it requires a very fast flow of changes. For instance, as an example, with emerging threats, it requires that the CM platform has rules that are constantly, of course, being done and changed by the SOC analysts. But more important was that it it required that own thinking as a platform engineering on how to actually onboard different data sources that from all of the different other platforms and applications, and how as what are actually the source data that the SOC analysts will actually need to make better detections and better operational uh, security. And that was actually the key thing, because we realized that when you leave that up to the normal central platform engineering team, it becomes a little bit different, because when it's not just about doing security control policies in your AWS account, as an example, it requires the cybersecurity platforms is in the very essence a data platform by itself, a very specific type of data platform, because in addition to having both the transformation, the ingestion and transformation of data, you also have to put this in your security event management system. And that was actually the interesting thing, that it requires that you look at this holistically as its own independent entity. So maybe a bit of the lessons when we look at this was that from this journey in the past years is that, and maybe the first lessons are a little bit common to any platform engineering, regardless about security or not, which is that it's really important that you look at different personas. When you need to create an operating model, a way that you are interfacing within teams in a very user-centric perspective, meaning that each platform engineering squad requires a bit of an understanding who are their customers. And developers are a type of customers, service managers are a type of customers, and SOC analysts are a different type of customers, right? We have been putting a lot of emphasis on this personas type in a way that we identified essentially three key personas when we look at this. We identified the developers, naturally, as mentioned, and we are measuring the developer experience, understanding how the developers are experiencing different changes, not just across different platforms. The other is the service management, um, understanding how different service managers are looking at the perspective, not just platform, but the whole ecosystem, from application management all the way to infrastructure. And then the third one, IT end users. So our employees and workforce in their own employee digital experience, because that's of course one very specific type of persona across the company, which is all of our employees that need to interface with IT services. and by definition with the platform teams, right? So that was like one big thing, and that I can advise everyone that look at your personas and how look at how uh, uh, who are you who are you serving as a platform team, right? Then the other was service offering and the service delivery model. One thing that we also early on realized is that it was really important, not just actually for platform engineering, but we did this across the whole IT. What are actually the application landscape? What are the services, technical services, business services that we are providing across IT? And you can align that, for instance, with the taxonomy like the TBM as an example. But then in addition to have that view, you also, it was really important for us to understand how we want to do the delivery of those services. And what we realized is that sometimes for the same type of technical service, we had two different suppliers and sometimes even or two different internal teams trying to do the same thing, but they were just the differentiator between those were actually super small. They, for instance, uh, vendor A was doing this specific type of capabilities, imagining backup and disaster recovery for everything that is in this type of environment, and the other was doing the same type of capability, but for that type of environment. And what we realize is that there's more synergies to be held if things start to be more holistic. And maybe the third part that I wanted to lift up is the automation part. Naturally, not everything needs to be automated, but when you start looking at the workflows and processes, I think the process oriented is really important, that you understand what are your IT processes. As an example, one of ours was looking at, well, when I want to request, when I need to request a new cloud environment, how does that process look like? And then identifying the bottlenecks on that process, understanding what makes sense to automate and what doesn't make sense to automate. That's incredibly important um, to make sure that you have a great user experience. But then, what are maybe more specific about cybersecurity that maybe it's kind of built into this, but is not at the same time? One was that cybersecurity is a little bit like infrastructure or platform engineering. There's a little bit different flavors, different subdomains on cybersecurity that are really important to understand. And it's, for instance, cybersecurity governance is one thing, security engineering is another one, and operative security operations is another one. And even that could be even refined further if you think about threat intelligence versus cyber risk quantification, right? So it was really important for us to really iterate a little bit over the relation and working model across these different cybersecurity responsibilities across the company, and understanding how that relates with each other, understanding what is actually the governance model that we want and what are the types of accountability and responsibility of different personas and functions across the company. Then another one that was important, and I mentioned this a little bit already in the past slides, but establishing these dedicated cybersecurity platforms. It's not something that should come a little bit on the side. It's not something that should be done by one or two persons. It's something that is really important that there's a focus on it so that you can actually make the best out of it, because it's not something that a cybersecurity specialist will know how to do it, at least not in a, let's say, modern software engineering type of way. Of course, anyone can hack a little bit around it, and it's not something that the SOC analysts can also do it. So to build a modern cybersecurity platform, it requires platform engineers. It requires engineers to work very closely with those stakeholders, right? So having that has been one of maybe the key maybe highlights on doing that for the future. And then I think, of course, when we talk about security, I think it's really important that security mindset is part of all the platform engineering teams that you have in the company. Of course, you can even go further. All employees, all partners should, of course, have a security mindset. But I wanted to lift this only for the platform engineering teams in the sense that uh, understanding that all of them have different aspects that they need to address in their day-to-day about platform engineering, about cybersecurity, and of course platform engineering. Meaning that if one is doing SOC data platforms, the other needs to make sure that, for instance, if they are managing landing zones, that they have control policies that are adequate. So it's a little bit understanding that mindset and what is expected from them. And then, of course, there's no. I think one thing also that has been a little bit kind of clear in my past 4 or 5 years in this journey on this part is that you need to make smaller, gradual, purposeful changes based on the organization maturity at the time. Meaning that yes, you need to change, but quite often you cannot make a radical change. You need to make smaller steps towards that, towards maybe that. Uh, Towards that best outcome based on the maturity of the organization at the time. The maturity is really important because it takes time for some people to assimilate certain principles. And a lot of things, it's been really hard in some cases when certain teams or persons have been doing things in a certain way for the past 10, 15, 20 years to change that operating model and that different way of thinking. So don't be afraid of making changes, but also make sure that you make them in a way smaller and gradual enough that the organization can mature at the same time with that. So that's maybe like one maybe less thought to leave with it. And understanding that we have some time for questions and answers, so happy to answer any questions that you might have. I hope that this resonated with all of you, and feel free, of course, to reach out even after this via LinkedIn.
Awesome. Bruno, I think we missed the camera. I don't know, something happened. Okay,
Oh,
that's great.
sorry about that.
No worries. Okay, so yeah, guys, you can just pop the questions in the chat or in the Q&A section. Just a reminder as well, this webinar is being recorded and we will be sending you the link to the recording and the slides tomorrow. So no worries about that in case you join a bit later. Let's see. Okay. Bruno, I think we cannot see you. Maybe you can deactivate and activate the camera again.
All right, sorry.
No worries. Okay, let's see the questions. All right. Okay. We have one question. It says, what skills do you have in cybersecurity platform squad? Are they security architects who understands industry regulations and policies, or platform engineers who can code it?
I think that's a great question. And sorry for my video, apparently it turns off automatically. I'm not sure why, but thank you for the great question. So in the cybersecurity platform squad, we have essentially engineers. Of course, it's engineers that have been working or needs to have a very strong security mindset. I mean, in the sense that, for instance, in some cases, you need to look about specific parts of engineering. As an example, um, OT environments, which is a little bit something of itself. But here, I think the regulation plays a role, of course, because we have not just industry regulations. In our case, as an example, each different energy technology, if you are thinking about wind or nuclear, as an example, they have their own different set of regulations. And then per countries where we are operating, there's also different kind of regulations, and of course, EU as well. So naturally, this is not something that a platform engineer by himself can understand fully well. I mean, we have, of course, compliance teams that try to build that bridge between what is actually the regulation saying and then how do we implement it and what are the requirements for it. So I think that here the perspective of having technical architects is definitely someone that makes a little bit of that bridge, but not even that person by themselves alone.
Thank you. So we have one person saying, thank you for the insights. I'm wondering about the tools you're using to enable developer self-service. Are you building your own API to call or something else?
So we use quite a few different tools. Naturally, I think maybe one that I will maybe even highlight is Backstage.io. We have been using it for like 3 or 4 years. We started in a very specific case, but I think, of course, when we look at developer self service, you want to have essentially a place where developers can go to find the information that is more relevant to them. And of course, it's a little bit different from the, let's say, employee self-service, right? In this particular case, I wouldn't say that we are too mature in Backstage, but I think it's been one maybe good addition to us in the past 3 years. We develop it for certain use cases, and of course we keep also expanding a little bit all the time. And of course we try to use a lot of out of the box capabilities, but by its own definition, we of course sometimes need to of course do build its own things.
Thank you. So how did you architect the capabilities up front, or have these submerged a agile engineer?
Sorry, can you repeat the question?
Sure. How did you architect the capabilities up front, or have these submerged agile engineer?
Oh, great question. Um, so to some extent, of course, we were rethinking a little bit the organization at the time, right? And of course, we had certain things in house. I think also, so to some extent, they were kind of iterated a little bit in the beginning on how to set them up and what should be that part. But it's also not, by its own definition, not static, in the sense that we had a lot of room also for people to hop between different squads if they wanted. And I think that that's also something that, I mean, it's not static. I mean, nothing is static really. So I think even if you design those capabilities on those squads and different domains in the beginning, and then when you realize that maybe certain things don't work so well, or you get different, so don't be afraid to change them. I think it needs to of course be something that works for your culture at the time, for your maturity as a company at the time.
Thank you. Do you have other established security teams already? How do you establish the lines of responsibility between security-focused platform engineers and those security teams?
So great question. So I think each squad has its own, maybe starting with the engineering part, each squad has its own domain areas, a little bit key responsibility areas within engineering. So, for instance, cybersecurity platform squad is looking at IT and OT SOC data platforms and tooling for the SOC analysts. If you look at our platform engineering squad that is looking at data centers and cloud, they are of course looking at those environments and looking at building that. Now, that by itself is only platform engineering. Now, the key part of the question is that how does that relate with different security teams? And this is actually maybe one of the key aspects, is that you need to understand the different responsibilities of different cybersecurity teams across the company. For instance, if you look at security operations center, very operative work, they are not doing engineering. They need to work very closely. They are maybe the main customer for the cybersecurity platform squad, but that is like one very clear relation. The same way that if you have a cybersecurity specialist, maybe they are a little bit of a virtual member of some of the squads, for instance, looking at aspects like network security. So there is different, this kind of this symbiosis between the distinction. I will say, I will maybe simplify in this way. You have people looking at governance and tactical of cybersecurity. You have people looking at cybersecurity engineering, and then you have people looking at cybersecurity operative work. And I think those maybe like these three different buckets. I think maybe there's a more simplistic way to put it, but that's maybe like one way to put it.
Awesome. Chris is asking, do you have clear lines of ownership for system tools, processes, or etc.?
Yes, absolutely. So any kind of application or technical service, we have that in our asset management database, our CMDB, which a clear owner with which is who is the system manager responsible for that service or application, and who is the to which squad in a way it belongs from a platform engineering. So there is that clear responsibility for each application or technical service that we have.
Okay. What challenges stand out for you when getting your OP model established?
What challenges? Many. I think it's a little bit. It can be very complex, but it can also be made very very simple. And I think this is a little bit. Um, Here the challenge goes that because we did this for the whole IT, not just this particular teams or this specific cyber, for the whole IT organization, we did the operating model. And I think maybe the key part is that if you make it very simple, I think it's really easy to anchor it within, especially with the business lines and the business stakeholders. But it often creates blurred lines into the different teams and different roles that are interfacing with an operating model. So you need both. You need a simple. You need to start simple and anchor in the basic principles, but then you need to have different. You need to go maybe a little bit more deep dive to understanding even on the trainings on that, on how you approach that topic to different target audience or different domain areas. It's not perfect. I think then the reality is that you have a model and you still need to make sure that people are in a way abiding by the model. And sometimes old habits really die hard. So it's a little bit, you need to often remind, maybe not using it as a, how to put it. I think the operating model, it's not actually about the document itself. It's really about the process of designing the document across the organization, because the document itself needs to be, of course, revisited every once in a while. But the point is that by having people looking at it, it's more like a north star, looking at how we should be working. And in case sometimes, and actually that happened a few times, that there was some unclarity on how do we handle this specific topic, and like, okay, hey, how do we actually design the process to be? And I think that helped to anchor that.
Thank you. So when you set processes, can you tell a little bit more on how it looks in terms of documentation and how it is up to date day by day and how you make everyone aware of that?
Hey, great question. I think there's, of course, processes across different levels. I mean, you have, of course, business or enabling function processes. For instance, if you think about HR, an employee onboarding, or offboarding. It's an HR process. So of course, there's that process needs to be defined by HR, but all of the processes need to connect or often connect with IT related process. For instance, I'm going to give this example that if you have HR or employee onboarding as an HR process, in IT process you might have that your employee AD life cycle, creating a new AD account, terminating AD account, right? So you need to have this linkage between that. This is really challenge to do to buy. So I think here, of course, both certain roles have some specific, I'll say, responsibilities. For instance, enterprise architects need, of course, to make sure that this is documented and that there's a linkage. And of course, in a perfect world, it will be everything documented. In an imperfect world that we live, so there's quite a lot of gaps often. So I think it's still a little bit also a work in progress in most of the cases. But then when you think about engineering processes, for instance, one thing is that we are doing more connected here in platform engineering is looking at different, when you look at these different platforms, maybe two things. One is, when looking at how the platform teams are working, you need to create those playbooks that are and standard operation procedures that are common to all of the squads. Then another one is that when you look at IT as a whole, there are certain IT processes that they're pretty well defined across all the industries. How you do incident management, how you do change management. So those are, we try to take also off the shelf as much as we can and based on different existing processes.
Any advice on adoption of Backstage and IDP as IDP for a team of 150 software developers?
Good. Well, in our particular case at Fortum, there's roughly 300 software engineers across very, very different type of projects. I hear the question here depends a little bit, why do you want to use Backstage in the first place? The answer might surprise you actually, because it's not so straightforward. In our case, we had many, as I mentioned, like almost 300 software engineers, developers, data engineers, you name it. And when you look at it, there was very different smaller sub teams, different projects. Now the question is a little bit, when you have 150 people or even 300, like, you need to find a commonality, and that's actually the important bit. When in our case, one of the first use cases of Backstage was because we wanted to create a technology radar for the developer community. What are the most common tooling that is being used across the teams? What are maybe the technologies that we are not advising to use, that we are retiring for one reason or the other? And that was actually one of the first use cases, to find that commonality, and that was our commonality at the time.
Awesome, thank you. Guys, do we have any more questions? We've got a few more minutes. Let's give it a few more. Okay. I think that's it. Well, thank you, Bruno, and thank you everyone who joined. If you come up with any questions later this week, you can just use the Slack. I sent the link in the chat. So yeah, thank you everyone, and have a nice evening or day. Bye, guys.